Now I want to bring on my guest. He's a two-time All-Big Ten performer, three-time Nebraska Scholar Athlete Honor Roll, Brooke Behringer's Citizenship Team 2012-2013, played in 53 games with 41 career starts, and the owner of One West Sports Group, Mr. Jeremiah Sirles. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fantastic, Adam. Thank you for having me on.
All right, dude. So you are the owner of a sports agent group. Is that's correct, right?
Yes, sir.
How did you get into that, and what is it like basically being an agent for pro football players and pro athletes? What is that like, dude?
Yeah, no, so when I retired in 2019, blew my ankle up twice, my career was over, and I started kind of reflecting back, what am I going to miss about the NFL? And for me, it wasn't putting a helmet on a Wednesday afternoon on 9-on-7 and banging against guys like you. But it was more along the lines of I was going to miss the mentorship, the guidance, helping young players understand what it meant to be a pro in this league. And so I was like, I thought about going into coaching. My wife and I had our first son at that point, and she put the kibosh on that pretty much instantly. And
Yep.
and so, I was talking with who was my agent at the time, Chris Giddings, he's been an agent for 27 years. And he was like, Jeremiah, all the things that you've mentioned that you want to do, we can do as an agency, but we'll get to select the guys that we get to do it with. And it's been awesomely rewarding, being able to take what I refer to as a PhD in football, 5 years in college, 6 years in the league, and then turn that around and give it back to young players and take the agent side from more of what the normal agent of, hey, we're just your contract negotiator, or we're your marketing team, we're going to do all this stuff off the field, and flip that on its head and say, hey, we're a football agency that's going to help create the best football player out of you, which then will lead to all the other stuff. And it's been extremely rewarding. I love doing it. I specifically work with more offensive linemen just because obviously that's why I played in the position. But I love it. It allows me to keep my feet in both college football and the NFL because I love both of them. And, it's been awesome 3 years here. Just finished my third draft cycle and already knee deep in recruiting for the next year and just going right back up the hill.
All right, dude. So what's it like negotiating on a contract with these NFL teams, these GMs? What is that like? I remember my rookie contract. Van McElroy and Jeff Nally, Select Sports Group. They were my agents, and they called me at one point, and they said, "Get ready for a long holdout, Adam. We ain't even close." And Jeff's like, "Yeah, Van might have stormed out of the room and threw his hands in the air and said, 'We're done.'" And I was like, "All right, I guess we'll see what happens." They called me 48 hours later. I was on the practice field. But what's it like negotiating with these NFL teams and these GMs?
Yeah, it's super interesting coming from the player side to the business side, right? Because your agent is obviously always the business side. And I think it's so important that you have an agent because in those meetings, in those negotiations, things get said that the player would take very personally, right? And that's just
Yep.
because that's just part of what business is, right? Like when you're coming down to dollars and cents and the salary cap, and obviously we want as much money as possible and the team wants to pay as little money as possible, and you have to find the middle ground. I love it because it allows me finally to have some leverage against the NFL, right? Like as a player, you always kind of feel like you're just a pawn in a greater scheme, which majority of the time you are, right? It just depends. Are you a pawn? Are you a rook? You a bishop? You're a king? You're a queen? But you're some piece of board chess piece player. And being on the other side, having leverage to say, hey, this is why he deserves this amount of money based off of research. And then also pulling it to like, hey, I've watched all the film. I know who he's better than. I know who he's comparable to. I know who got paid last year. And then finding a way to make it all work. But, we take the approach too of, at the end of the day, we want to make a deal where at the end of it, we shake hands, everyone's happy, and we can move on, not draw a hard line in the sand. And then at the end of the deal, nobody's happy. And then that relationship could be ruined for future going on. So it's been a huge learning curve on my end, and I rely heavily on Chris, who's been doing it for so long, but I've been having a ton of fun with it. It's nice coming into this business with a little bit of respect. When you wore the shield, some of these guys know they can't pull one on you because it's like, I know I sat in those meetings. I know what's actually said, right? Like you can kind of pull a little bit of that, which has been great, but it's really fun. I thoroughly enjoy it. And, it's cool to get to see both sides of the coin now of how the business side of the NFL truly works.
Dude, I'm just going to say it, the egos that get involved sometimes, the money that's involved in these things. Dude, anytime you stick it just a little bit to the NFL, and I got nothing but love for the NFL, but anytime you stick it just a little bit to the NFL, dude, just know that I'm smiling. I got your back on that, and I love that. Was my favorite thing. You said a lot of great things. That was my favorite thing so far. All right, let's talk Nebraska football, Nebraska offensive line. Okay, left tackle, we know Teddy Prohaska, Turner Corcoran. Okay, do you think Teddy ends up starting at left tackle? Do you think Corcoran, is he a backup? Do you think he potentially goes to guard? Obviously, we got Justin Evans-Jenkins, Henry Latufsky, we got Micah Mazuka. What are your thoughts on some of that stuff?
Yeah, Teddy, for me, I just the number one thing for me is stay healthy, right? Mm-hmm. Him getting through the spring was enormous, right? I think that's something that isn't talked about as much as he's never had a full spring, right? Like he's never had a full off season, right? Yep. He's always been rehabbing, and you've had injuries and I've had injuries. And when you have an injury going into the off season, it's pretty much done, right? Like you're just hoping to get back to where you were the year before, instead of actually taking huge strides in your strength and conditioning and your technique and your skill level. Like when you're just rehabbing, you're like, man, I just hope I'm what I was before the injury. And so for him to have the full spring to be able to get himself into camp, get himself going, be able to self-correct, and then also self-scout and say, okay, this is what I did well in camp. This is what I did well in spring, and focus on it. I would love to see him be the starting left tackle for the Huskers next year, because I think the potential, the body frame is all there, and it's all right out in front of him. Now, I would love to see Turner at guard. I've been saying it for years. I think he would be a much better guard than tackle, just based on some of the arm length things, some of the anchor issues he had outside on the edge. But you start looking at, I think Micah was a great addition into this offensive line room, coming from an SEC school, having that type of mentality. I mean, this dude tried to box a dude at the 10-yard line, right? Like he's got yep. He's got that dog in him, right? You got to have that in your line room. You got to have some of that go-getter mentality, and I think he brings some of that. Then you bring Ben Scott back for a solid spot in the middle there at center position. You got to have the captain of your O-line right, ready to go all the time. And then you look at the right guard spot, and it's okay. Is it Latofsky? Is it Evans-Jenkins? Right, competition is great there. And then obviously having Benhart come back for his last year, which I thought he played his best football last year. So having him to be able to come back and anchor that right side of the offensive line. I will say I'm slightly jaded. He's going to break my start record at Nebraska because he has the 6th year. So I'm going to say there's an asterisk next to it. I'm not going to say it's legitimate, but I mean, hey, it is what it is.
I get it.
I'm excited for this group. I think that Coach Raiola has done a nice job. He has his system in place. Obviously, a lot of these guys went to bat for him when Rule showed up. Was like, hey, no, this is our guy. He stuck around. I think that this position needs to be a strength on this team, because if you're going to have a young quarterback back there, you play in the DN position, for sure if there was a young quarterback, all you want to do is get him on the ground and get him on the ground early and rattle him. It's going to be really important that if Raiola starts for us at the Huskers quarterback position, that the guys up front keep him clean.
All right, do you think that this finally will be the year? Because I myself, for years, have talked about the potential of the offensive. I've used that word mind-numbingly amount of times over the past 4 or 5 years, and we have yet to put together a consistent season along the offensive line over the past 4 or 5 years. Is this finally the year that they can put it together up front and, like you said, be a strength of the team?
I want to say yes, but I'm with you, Adam. I've said the same thing for years, but the thing that concerns me, if there's anything that concerns me with the O-line, is the dreaded word every coach hates, depth, right? Because it's very unlikely that your starting 5 offensive linemen that you roll into week 1 with are the same 5 guys you play with all the way up through week 12, right? Guys get dinged, guys get hurt, like guys get rotated. Like you want to have 8 to 10 guys you feel really comfortable about, that if one guy goes down, it's not a major drop off to the next player. And so I think that if all 5 can stay healthy for 85 to 80% of the games, absolutely. But if we start missing a guy here or there, 1 or 2 guys, and start playing the shuffle guys around game to try and make it through, I mean, our backup tackles are young, right? Mm-hmm. Young. And that's not a recipe for winning football, to have young tackles in college. So I think that if guys can stay healthy and stay on the field, absolutely, this is the year that we can make that jump. But we're 1 or 2 injuries away from being a little bit in scramble mode.
It makes Teddy Prohaska getting through the spring, like you pointed out, that much more of a bigger deal. And I mean, I talked about Fedoni earlier, going into year 2. Okay, he's going to feel much better than that first year, which he played the entire year last year, but coming off those major injuries he had in his knee, he should be feeling good. Hopefully, Teddy can get to the point where he's feeling really good about his body, his knees, etc., sooner rather than later. All right, man. Couple of questions for you. So you played for Bo Pelini. All right. So, Bo is the guy that I had the pleasure of playing for as a redshirt freshman. Okay. I didn't play a ton. I was backing up Trevor Johnson and a couple other guys at that point in time, but I got to be in those meeting rooms. I got to see his fire and his love and his passion for the players and everything else. But if a fan were to just come up to you and ask you, what was it like playing for Bo? What would be your response so people can just kind of get a feel for that? Because I think people to this day are still intrigued with Bo Pelini, who did a great job here at Nebraska.
Yeah, the number one thing I said is, I love that man, right? I love that man, and not just because he was a great football coach, because he was a great leader of men. And if you ask me what the number one quality for a head coach in college football is, that's it. Can he lead and develop young men? Right, not just to being football players, but to being good men in society. And I'll never forget my first unofficial visit I took up here in June before my senior season. I drove up here with my dad, and we sat in Coach Pelini's office for an hour and a half, and Bo had his feet up on the desk like he liked to do, and he would just he talked to us about football for maybe 20 minutes, and then the rest of it was about his plan for how it was academics and how we were going to prepare with the life skills department, how important school was to him. And, and that was such a big piece for me. But then the other piece of it too was you avoided Bo on game day like the plague because he was so fiery.
Yep.
Right. And I love that about him because that's the competition. That's what all of us who played this game have a couple screws loose, man. And they come out at weird times, and his came out on game day. And unfortunately, that was when he was visible to the millions of people across the nation that would watch him. But he was the first one that would come down on you and let you know that you were screwing up. But he'd also be the first one to pull you into his office on a Monday and put his arm around you and say, hey, we need better out of you and we need this. Or he'd be the first one to come into a class check. I'll never forget when I had a class as a freshman and I saw his head pop in to actually check who was there in class. I was like, oh, man, this dude is for real, right? Like, he was just awesome. I'd run through a wall for that dude. I love that guy. I think he was arguably one of the top 3 coaches I've had throughout my entire career.
So obviously there's a whole lot of debate about how he was let go, should it have happened, yada, yada. But it's interesting to me because my first game under him as our defensive coordinator, my redshirt freshman year, we played Utah State, and they went right down the field and scored. Like just a knife through the hot, soft butter. And I was like, and the starters came off and I was like, oh my God, Bo's going to blow a gasket. Like I was like scared for them. And I was pretty much just scared in general. Being my first game, I might see some real action. And dude, he was so calm. He like gathered everybody. And I remember the conversation to this day. He's like, just calm down. Just chill out. He's like, they lift weights. They're on scholarship. They're allowed to make plays too. There's going to be things that go our way, things that go their way. At the end of the day, it's how you respond to the things that go well for them. And then they never scored the rest of the day. And that conversation has always stuck with me. And I've always wondered, because there's so much that goes into being a head coach, okay, in football. I mean, it is exponentially harder than being a position coach, a coordinator. And those jobs are not easy. I'm not saying that, but the head coach has so much on his plate. I always kind of wondered, and Scott Frost too, I always thought maybe they were better suited for like the coordinator position because certain things just got to them a little bit more as the head coach than they otherwise would have. What are your thoughts on that?
Specifically to just the general overall, like your statement there, you're 100% correct. And we see it time and time again, more in the NFL, I think, where you see a guy that's a phenomenal coordinator and then they go put head ball coach on as the ball cap, and it just falls apart at the seams. Because when you're head ball coach, like I said, when you're D coordinator, all you're worried about is, hey, who's playing this week? What front are we in? What blitz package do I want to put in? And that type of thing. Now you're a head coach. You're working with, hey, I got media on Tuesday. I've got this guy that's got a problem. I've got to coordinate everything else. Like, you become more like a CEO than a true football guy. And then also some of these head coaches still want to call plays. So then you're splitting time into both worlds. And that's why the great ones are so great. And that's why it's such a hard position to be able to do. But yeah, I think that was a piece of it with Bo. Like, that's a piece of it with every head coach that has failed at one point in time, is you can stretch yourself too thin. And I think that the great head coaches are great delegators. Like, they understand how to use their strengths of the people they surround themselves with, give them the responsibility. Ultimately, the buck stops with you, right? And you're the one that makes the tough decisions. But, the ones that I've been around that have been truly great are the ones that have delegated well and allowed the people they've surrounded themselves with to work in a free fashion.
All right, my man, last two questions for you. You had the opportunity to play with a lot of great former Huskers, a lot of big names in Husker football history. Is there a teammate or two that just kind of stood out to you? Maybe they were, the funny guy in the locker room, or they had a unique personality, or maybe they were just freaking crazy. I don't know. Is there a teammate that kind of stood out to you during your playing days and time here at Nebraska?
That's such a great question. I think that the guy that stood out to me the most, and maybe was the most eye-opening guy to me on the field, was Randy Gregory. He wasn't there. I think it was the 2012 season. We were going into the 2012 season, maybe the 13, I can't remember. And he wasn't there through the whole summertime. And he just showed up at training camp at the 105. And our first one-on-one, this dude's lined up across me. I'm like, I have no idea who this dude is. Like, who is this guy? And he ran around me like I was standing still. And I remember I looked at Barney Cotton and I go, who the F is that guy? And they were like, yeah, that's Randy. He's going to be really good for us. And Randy ended up turning out to be a phenomenal teammate. He made me such a better player going against him every single day in practice. And, he was just a great guy, and super excited that he's found his way in the NFL, because he was just such a special talent and he did such great things for the Huskers.
All right, last question for you, my man. The Kool-Aid's flowing this offseason. People are excited. The first 7 games are very winnable. We got a lot of veterans coming back at just about every position. Obviously, Harburg at quarterback, but probably going to be Young at quarterback. Outside of that, a lot of vets coming back. All right, man, what are your thoughts on the Kool-Aid? And it tastes so good right now in June. But what are your thoughts on the Kool-Aid heading into this fall for Husker Nation?
Yeah, I'm all in on the Rool-Aid and the Kool-Aid, man. I'm super excited for this fall. Probably more excited than I've been for probably since when Scott Frost's first year. That was kind of a super exciting moment for Husker Nation. I think this feels like that. But I do think, being around Coach Rule, seeing the way that he coaches, seeing the way the guys are bought in, seeing the fact that we had seniors that had chances to go to the NFL or hit the portal and go somewhere else that all stayed and bought back in. I'm all in on this team. I think that if they can stay healthy, the sky's the limit for them in these first 7 games. And as you know, confidence is such a big thing in football. If we can just get this team some confidence early in the year, winning some big games, Colorado at home, squishing Dion, doing those type of things, I think that this team could really be primed to have a massive year.
All right, man. I appreciate you taking the time to join me.